not quite.
What's up?
Sell my car on Carvana. It's just not quite the right time.
Crazy coincidence. I just sold my car to Carvana.
What? I told you about it 2 days ago.
When you know, you know. You know? I'm even dropping it off at one of those sweet car vending machines and getting paid today.
That's a good deal.
Oh, great deal. Come on. What's your heart saying?
You're right. When you know...
You know.
Sold.
Whether you're looking to sell your car right now or just whenever feels right, go to Carvana.com and sell your car the convenient way. Terms and conditions apply.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
so some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. Returning to the podcast on this week's episode is literary agent Becca Langton. Hello, welcome back.
Oh, I'm very glad to be back. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I know you've been super busy, so thank you so much for making the time to come back on the podcast. First time around was about 2 years ago now that you were on the podcast, and so I imagine a lot has happened. But anyone listening, if you want to hear more about Becca's journey into becoming an agent and what that looked like, we covered that and a lot more in the previous episode, which is number 92. We'll probably retread some ground on this. But then kind of see what's changed, see what's new. So let's start off by catching up and just checking in. As a literary agent, what are the genres and age brackets that you represent?
So I kind of, as before, do pretty much everything, all the way from like the very, very young, illustration for very small babies. And actually, I'm have a client who's got an amazing book of poetry for like new babies coming out with Walker Books. That's Mara Bergman, and it's beautiful. It's really beautiful, and it is poems to share with the tiniest of humans, the earliest of readers. And then we go all the way up to the top to YA, and actually even crossover, which is probably something which has changed since the last time we spoke, because I feel like the new adult crossover space is a kind of burgeoning one, or has in the last year really come alive. And although I wouldn't probably go into the super grown up spot, there's definitely room for something which feels a little bit more for the kind of the literal new adult, the 19, 20-year-olds in college and university looking for books that reflect their experiences, as adults who are just starting out. Okay,
so very much, still the youngest of young up to like YA, but the difference is with the kind of way that new adult and crossover has been introduced into the industry and kind of changed things, you're maybe looking slightly older than you had previously.
Yeah, I think, we talk a lot about what does new adult mean and what does crossover mean, and I think there are all sorts of stats out there, and I think I've heard one recently which was like 75% of YA readers are between the age of like 25 and 40 or something like that. It was really quite stark that actually a lot of the readers of the books that we're working on are grown-ups. They're not even young adults, they are middle-aged adults almost. And that means that, actually I've sort of split my list in my head into two quite distinct groups, which is books very much for teenagers, and that's maybe the 11 to 15-year-olds who aren't really ready for like super sexy dragons, but do want to have a sense of growing up and adventure and and independence from parents and snark and funniness and all that kind of thing, and first romance. And then there's the YA, which is in that really core young adult spot, so something which actually might appeal to 30-year-olds, say, but has the essence of YA, which is stories which are compelling and page turners, romance, heart stoppery stuff, anything which feels like it appeals in that sort of sensibility rather than content. And I look at a book like Fourth Wing, and actually I think, well, that has all the hallmarks of being a young adult book, and that's I think why it's so popular, and then actually has got really inappropriate content for a 12-year-old. So it's actually not YA, but it reads like one. And actually that's why it's so popular, I think, is it hits the sweet spot for all those readers who love YA. They love the Hunger Games, they love they love the sort of books that, you know, draw you in and spit you out the other side, and actually, you know, they're not really demanding reading literary fiction, not asking too much of you. They're pure entertainment, but actually also have that really like fun, hot romance. And that's not to say that YA, it can't be literary and it can't be beautiful and it can't be high quality and wonderfully written. But I think there is something that is really speaking to a generation of adults who maybe didn't have it growing up themselves and actually maybe missed out on that really lovely sort of teen-friendly sort of bookshelf. So yeah, I mean, that's also which constantly thinking about and trying to work out how to reach a market which is actually incredibly got a huge reach. It goes all the way down from, you know, kids who are just entering big school all the way up to adults who maybe have got children of their own. So yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It's interesting looking at YA through the lens of, well, once you have the data, you see that, yeah, that it's actually mostly adults reading YA, which is a categorization that we're saying is not for adults.
Yeah, but it is in fact all for adults.
So yeah, knowing that it's kind of actually largely adults who are reading this, do you kind of consider yourself then like you're a YA and children's agent, but actually you market to adults?
I mean, I think because we still predominantly sell to children's lists and children's editors and children's imprints, I think it's just we have to be conscious when we're reading that you know, there is the demand, because actually the demand is still for YA books by those readers. You know, the 30-year-olds or the 28-year-olds, if they wanted to read a book for adults, they could read a book for adults. There's plenty out there for them. And they want to read books with emerging teenagers finding first love and fighting off, you know, terrible evil. And I think there's a small part of me which wonders whether, given the political climate, the climate, the sense of foreboding that we're constantly kind of battered with social media and the news cycles, and, you know, we're not allowed to live in a world of optimism, which I think maybe we did 30, 40 years ago, with a sense of progression. We now live in a world in danger. And I also think that that's not always the reality. You know, there is progress all over the world, but we're not told about it. You know, there is, and I will try not to get on my soapbox about the news cycle and 24-hour news and the constant pinging from the BBC News on people's phones when they're telling them like alert, things are bad. But actually, what children's literature does is say to the reader, we can make things better. You know, you will face a problem, and you can overcome it. And you can overcome it using your ingenuity and your bravery and your skills and your friends and your family and your community, which is such an important message. And it's, you know, or a reminder even, because I'm sort of against also message-driven publishing. But, you know, when we're thinking about what are we telling our young people, what are we telling ourselves, I really fundamentally believe we should be telling each other and ourselves that we can make things better. And we need to look to our community, and we need to look to our friends, and we need to look to making connection. And whether that's, you know, a school class or a new friend, or doing something with, you know, people you have never met before, that's how you make the world better. And that's what these books are doing. And I wonder whether the adults in the world who are just beaten down by the world they see around them find a little bit of solace in YA. So all that to say, I think we just have to keep on doing what we're doing. And actually, if we find a YA feeling book that suddenly has a really kind of spicy dragon romp in it, that's kind of okay too. And actually, you know, that speaks to those readers as well. And that's where I guess new adult sits. And I think North America has been looking for those books for longer than the UK, but now the UK is catching up as well. But obviously I also work in the US predominantly, so I'm able to speak to editors who are actively looking for new adult and looking for college stories and are looking for that as part of their lists. So I think that just kind of opens the door for me a little bit in what I'm reading. I have some flexibility because there is a demand for it that hopefully we can fulfill.
Yeah, it's nice to hear about the kind of optimism in stories in, like you say, a kind of difficult time that we all live in. But I guess it's also, when you look at it in terms of that wide, like you were saying, like these books are appealing to a huge range of people. It's nice to know that it does feel sometimes, especially if you go online, that there's a sort of generational battle between all different generations of people, but these kind of YA novels appeal across multiple generations to multiple people. I guess it's nice in the way it's like hopefully bringing people together with a mutual interest that we can all share in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think when you sort of get into the weeds of what the publishing business does and what we have the ability to do, then you start maybe seeing more of a political divide rather than a generational divide. And actually, books are on the side of imagination and freedom of thought and ambition, and which is why book banning is such a hot topic, because actually you can see what books can do for people. It can open up a whole new world of possibility and identity and, you know, new ideas. And if you know, books really are community, and if you find other people in books, you usually see them in the world as well. And that's why representation is so important, and, you know, a real diversity of characters and authors and illustrators and publishers and editors. And actually, you might be by yourself reading a book, but actually when you're holding a book which is written by someone who doesn't look like you, or drawn by someone who has a completely different experience growing up from you, or is portraying kids on the page who speak a different language, or, you know, grown up in another part of the country, or another, I don't know, whatever, it's different, then you're building community like that. And that's why books are so powerful. And I think that's why we continue to do what we do, even though it can be hard and it can be draining and it can be stressful. It, you know, it can also be joyous and fun and liberating and exciting. So yeah, we carry on. Yeah,
we do carry on. I'd love to touch on, you mentioned you do work a lot with the US markets, even though obviously you live in the UK and you're UK based. How does that work out, and how come you ended up working over like internationally like that?
I mean, mostly by luck and chance, honestly. I was approached by Darlie Anderson to be a North American agent, and I've been working as a scout, which is this kind of behind the scenes job, which is almost like a rights job. It's an editorial meets rights job where you read everything going, and then you report back to editors from other territories and say, this is what's really hot, or this is really exciting, or they'll say to you, look, I just really need a book about a dragon in a library, or I really need a book that is super sexy and has queer Dungeons and Dragons, and here you go, here's that book. And so I had that breadth of experience, and you know, I was approached and leapt on the job because I couldn't think of anything better. And honestly, I was right, it is the most fantastic job. But yeah, I'm based in London, and as you can hear probably and tell, I'm not North American. I really have no connection apart from my avid Netflix watching with North America. But I will say that you know, certainly post 2020, most of the people working, or not most, but a lot of the people working as editors and agents in America aren't actually in New York anymore. And so much of what happens on Zoom. So I do visit once a year. I try to get over to New York and have in-person meetings, because I do think is invaluable, and those relationships are wonderful. And I think the personal relationships you build are fantastic. But actually, I don't really feel that much of it's a disadvantage compared to my sort of US counterparts, because ultimately we're all on Zooms most of the time anyway. So it just involves having to do a lot of reading, you know, outside of my own sort of locality. But having said that, there's so much crossover now anyway, and you know, there's so much online, it's easier, I think, than maybe it was 10-15 years ago to just have a sense of what's going on. And actually I also sell North American rights for my UK colleagues, so for British authors, or you know, authors, so selling into the UK first rather. Yeah, I would, sorry, not British authors, but UK first authors and illustrators. I can sell the North American rights, which is wonderful.
Yeah, because most UK-based agents, I would imagine, are, when they are looking for new authors and new novels to kind of sign up, they are looking based on the UK market primarily. But yes, I would guess that you look at queries and you're actually thinking of the US market first. Yes,
absolutely. So I have my own list, and then I also have a kind of rights role within the company. But my list is very much in the fiction side, at least, very much leaning towards having US authors. In the illustration side, actually, it's kind of more of an even split, because I think art travels sort of with a little more ease because there's less of the kind of linguistic barriers. And it's much more about style, but actually we had a lot of crossover anyway. But my authors are all in the US, and actually, again, they're all over the US. They're in Ohio and California and Nebraska, and they're everywhere. I actually wouldn't be able to see them anymore if I was living in New York than I do in UK. So I think that that there's little difference there.
When it comes to UK market, US market, and obviously there's going to be a lot of nuance to this, and I imagine the US being such an enormous place, it'll vary from state to state invariably. But what are the kind of key differences in terms of what readers are looking for in terms of readers from the US and readers from the UK?
Oh, interesting. I think the key differences probably are just experience. So there's less demand in the US to read a British high school story, and right. I think obviously British readers are more comfortable reading high school stories because they're just used to them. But in the YA space, I think that's kind of where the key split is in like contemporary. Fantasy is, it's really much of muchness, because once you've got a fantastical world and a wonderful writer, then most readers can appreciate the world that's been created. And then I think what we're seeing, and I say this with some caution because things change so quickly, but there is a upsurge in the US.
O'Reilly. Need a little help? O'Reilly Auto Parts can help. Need advice? We've got advice. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Exceptional customer service. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people. O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Of really wonderful middle grade British writing. So if you look at books like The Swifts and Greenwild and Impossible Creatures, books which are written by UK first authors but have translated incredibly well, I think that it's clear that part of the readership in the US are really open to a kind of more British sensibility in the writing. I think maybe that's a classic feeling story. And we do it really well here. So that feels very portable, I suppose.
Oh, I see. And that's interesting because Greenwild I know especially because Parry was on the podcast.
Oh, brilliant.
And that one I know is set it's set around Kew Gardens. So that's very like UK centric, landmark centric.
Yeah, no, it is. I think there's something that translates for, I mean, maybe it's the Harry Potter quality of it. Well, I always say Harry Potter kind of has got British sensibility, but actually isn't really in Britain at all. Like Hogwarts is a fantastical world. So
it's in Scotland.
It's in Scotland. Well, I mean, yes, okay. If you can find Hogwarts on the map, do tell me. But I feel like that kind of opened up the US market a little bit to a British voice, even though technically that world doesn't really exist.
It kind of reads more like Portal fantasy in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's where we now have this kind of really amazing tradition of like quality British writing working well in the States, and it works really well when it works. So it's just we need to find that sweet spot, and I don't know how British something has to become before US readers say actually no, too much, and then it's too much. But I think they're really receptive to lovely quality British writing in that space, particularly
in middle grade specifically. That's really interesting.
Upper middle grades and as I was saying before, I think that kind of that young teen space. So like 11 to 13, those readers who are still ambitious readers but are children still and aren't ready for the YA TikTok tables. They really don't want that, and neither do their parents or adults. The adults in their lives don't want them reading big YA from TikTok, but they want them to be pushed, and that's where we can offer something really, really cool. And of course, the US are also producing those amazing authors who are doing incredible work for those kids, but we just seem to be able to sort of offer it in a way which feels very natural to our market.
That's so interesting, because that kind of tween age group, from what I've heard, has been quite hard to break into the market with.
Yeah, we don't talk about it, but I think that's contemporary. I do feel like that's that contemporary spot, which is harder. But when you are able to do a fantasy book in that space, then it's a little bit easier, because actually, if you're 10 or 11 and you're still reading because you're in year 6, and you can read up, that's where those books are. And I think where we lose kids is when they get to secondary, and then that's where you're looking at like 14 and 15. So I think, as a rule of thumb, we always think kids are reading 2 years above their age. So if you're 10, you're reading about 12-year-olds, and that's that kind of Impossible Creatures spot, I guess. And when you're 12, you're reading like 14-year-olds. And where are the books with 14-year-olds in them? And they're really hard, because actually 14-year-olds are thinking about their sex lives as much as they're thinking about following unicorns around. So yeah, it's a really tricky spot, because of course it is, because it's so confusing to the children, let alone the people trying to write them and for them. And there's a huge variety of experience when you're 14, because some kids haven't hit puberty at all, and some are well through it and looking for more grown up stuff. And there's just less homogeneity in terms of actual interest, I guess. I think that's where we're still working out how to cater to those kids. And that's not to say they don't want it, because they really do. But it's just harder to find them, I think. Yeah.
I've heard, I think it's comic books and like Japanese manga is doing very well in that age group.
Yeah, the graphic novel space is really taking off here. And obviously it's been really well established in the US, but it's a spot that I've been really enjoying reading recently, because as someone who's tired and stressed, opening up a graphic novel is just so fulfilling. I've read a whole book, and it's 45 minutes later, done, and it's so easy to read. And I think, but again, I think it's a post 2020 world. We saw a lot of kids really, really, really affected by lockdowns and COVID, and their reading age suffered. Understandably, they basically lost the foundations of learning to read if they missed their reception year or their year 1 year. And then if you're missing, years 3 and 4, like that's a huge social moment, and more learning missed. So graphic novels are a great route back into kids who haven't got that grounding in literacy that other generations have had. And I think even in straight fiction, we're finding books that are maybe quite big, but the text is very, very sparse, or is interrupted by pictures, or there are other ways into engaging brains which are maybe a little bit, I guess, kind of overwhelmed by big block text in a way which other kids haven't been. And I think I'm all for it, because actually a kid opening a book is a kid opening a book, and why do we care whether it's a graphic novel or award-winning piece of fiction? I don't think it matters. I think we should be celebrating reading in all its forms. And I think even as a young person, I remember there being a sort of snobbishness about kids reading annuals or the Guinness Book of Records. But there's nothing wrong with it. It's brilliant. It's brilliant publishing. There's a reason the Guinness Book of Records is so popular and continues to remain popular, because kids love facts, and also it's reading. I love the Guinness Book of Records. I still have my copy from, I think, 1999. I regularly delve back into seeing the man with the long fingernails. It's wonderful.
Oh yeah. I remember that picture. I mean, anyone who thinks that because it's in a medium like a graphic novel, then it can't be sophisticated and literary. I mean, I've read several of Alan Moore's graphic novels, and those are some of the most intelligent, like sophisticated, most like brain boggling things I've ever experienced as a reader.
One of my favorite books that I've picked out recently is a US graphic novel called The New Girl. I think her name's Cassandra Cullen, although I need to check that. But and it's about a girl who emigrates from Romania to the US, and she has to work out how to survive in a school where she doesn't speak the language. Oh no, sorry, she moved to Canada.
Okay.
So she's learning French, and it's really hard, and everything's tough, and she has terrible periods. And I was reading it thinking, this would not necessarily translate to straight fiction. This girl with like awful cramps, and she's worried about bleeding through her trousers and all this stuff, which somehow is completely palatable in the graphic novel form because it's so cute and bright and child friendly, and it's perfect for an 11-year-old reader. It really, really hits the sweet spot in a way that I just don't know if it would if it was written. I think it would feel a lot more serious, a book about being, a new girl not speaking language in a foreign country and really missing home and her grandparents and her friends. But somehow the poppiness of the graphic novel just like lifts it beautifully.
Yeah. You can do so much with that, the kind of visual aspect of it, and like the way things are placed and the way things are drawn and all of that stuff.
Totally.
It's a lot of goes into it. Getting back onto, we touched on the children's market right now, and middle grade fantasy, I know, had this kind of very big boom some years ago. I was under the impression, at least in the UK, that had died down and it was quite a hard space to kind of get into. What does it look like to you?
Well, yeah, I think it's probably everything goes in peaks and troughs, and you probably had a very high peak with something like Scandar, and the trough we're in now is just not Scandar levels. That's to say, yeah, it is harder, and their lists are fuller because people bought books 2 or 3 years ago that looked like that. But that's not to say it won't work. I'm in the middle of an auction for an amazing British fantasy novel for probably in that sort of teen space, upper middle grade really, which is absolutely that in that lovely fantasy quality writing spot. And it's amazing writing, and it's amazingly Imagine's world. And we've had an auction in the UK and an auction in the US. Like, it does work. It just needs to be special. And I think it maybe there's less demand for it, but I think the demand is less for books that fill a spot that look like other books. So there's always space for brilliance.
It's one of those, like you say, it's ebbs and flows, but they're not necessarily predictable ebbs and flows.
Totally, yeah. I'm willing to see what happens next. And I called it, I feel I called it last year at Bologna. I was like, I think Romantasy is finished. And I think it is. Not finished, but people have Romantasy on their list now, and they don't need another one. Unless it's really spectacular or really does something different or really, really, really is very compelling. There's going to be enough on the shelves for the next 2 or 3 years that people aren't falling over themselves to get a book that looks like all the other books.
Yeah, because the publishers, I mean, if you go on Bookseller and you can see all the announcements over the past sort of year or so, the publishers are all like stocked up. We're going to get a lot of Romantasy coming out in the next, like you say, couple of years. I've seen like lots of the kind of ones that started things off are going into like movie production and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We're about to be flooded with it, which means, I would imagine agents and publishers, editors are looking to the future where they're saying like, right, this market's about to be very saturated. What's the next thing?
Yeah. And I think often it's almost a little bit reactionary. That new thing will come along. Everyone will fall over themselves for it. Only one will get it. And then everyone else is looking for the thing that they've missed out on. And then we'll get a big boom in it. Or, TikTok will decide that a book that they have found is incredible and sales will take off, and suddenly everyone will be looking for the book that looks like that book.
Exactly.
So I think I always say to writers, you just can't write to the market because you'll be too late ultimately.
Because just the time that it takes to create something like that. We are about the point in the episode where we head over to the desert island, but of course, Becca, you have been to the desert island before, and last time you kind of gave me an either or answer, and your two choices were Cold Comfort Farm, Stella Gibbons, or The Lost Art of Keeping Secrets, Eva Rice.
Yeah. Someone asked me yesterday, They asked me what are your 2 favourite books, and those are the 2 books that I said. So I feel like actually nothing has changed. I would add in The Arrival by Sean Tan.
Okay.
Because I think it's just an absolute masterpiece, and I've got prints on my wall from it, and it's a book that I always return to as something really, really special. Yeah, I think there are actually very few books that I reread, and those 3 are absolutely books that I return to. I mean, not including picture books, because I am forced to read picture books over and over and over and over again by my children, so I don't get a choice in that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice that you have like a very core group of like these books that you are like unanimous. These are the ones I will never forget. These books I will always keep rereading these books, and I imagine slowly over the years, like you might find a new one to add, and then it'll grow very slowly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think as the kind of reader that I am, although I absolutely delight in beautiful, sort of really, really lush writing, my very unguilty pleasure is books which are just page turners. So I will happily sit and read 15 thrillers on a beach somewhere. I love it, but I don't need to read them again. I've got no interest in returning to those books. I just want to be in that experience of needing to know what happens next. I don't have any. I don't remember them. I've often read books and I think I know this book, and it's because I read it already, and it's gone. It's out of my mind. So
it's like watching like a silly action comedy movie or something like that. It's like I'm enjoying it and I'm glad I'm seeing it. I've immediately forgotten the plot an hour after the movie's finished. It's
exactly
done. It's just there to entertain me for sure. It's not like a deep, meaningful piece of art, whatever medium that comes in, where you're thinking about it and then it comes back to you like a few weeks later and like a month later and then a year later, and you're like, I should experience that again.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of feel like sometimes we forget that that's what books can do, that, and books should do that. And not every book that we read needs to be an improvement in our lives or an improvement of ourselves. Like, it is completely legitimate to read a book because you've heard about it or you saw it on TikTok and it sounds kind of compelling, and then it is, or you just need to know like who killed him, or where this person is, or whatever it is, or you just need to know whether they get together or not in the end. Like, that's it, that's fine, the end.
Yeah.
Or it's also okay to open a book and it's boring, you just stop. I don't know. I just got no interest in treating literature and treating books as a kind of higher art form, because it's great for them to be entertainment. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Next up, I wanted to follow up on, you mentioned, and that you're currently in an auction. I know that you had another auction recently as well. I wanted to just ask a bit about the mechanics of those things, and then also check in on what Becca's looking for in queries and things like that as we approach the sort of the end of the year. And thinking back, we talked about this last time you were on, but that, as I say, 2 years ago, I imagine a lot has changed. But all of that stuff's going to be in the extended episode, which you can find at patreon.com/rightandwrong.
Yeah, anyway, I shouldn't. I'm probably going to get sued. I just hope that all those young readers who love Harry Potter still find their Hogwarts, which makes them feel at home, because that's what Hogwarts did for a lot of people for a long time and doesn't anymore. But that's not to say it can't or shouldn't.
Yes, it's always good to have some escapism.
Exactly.
But thank you so much, Becca, for coming back on the podcast and chatting with me, telling us all about everything you've been up to and what's going on in publishing. It's been really, really awesome chatting with you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. It's a joy.
And for anyone wanting to keep up with what Becca is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at Becca_Langton, on Instagram at Agent_Becca. And if you want to submit, go to DarlieAndersonChildren's.com and you can find a link to her query manager on there. To support the podcast, like, follow and subscribe. Head over to the Patreon for bonus content and ad-free extended episodes. And check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again, Becca, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.